History tells us that D-Day was won by the youth of America. It was won by the 19-year-old farm boys from Kansas, the factory workers from Detroit, and the school kids from New York. And that is true. But the first man to touch the sand of Utah Beach, the man who led the very first wave into the fire, was not a young man. He was 56 years old. He walked with a cane because his arthritis was so bad he could barely stand without grimacing. He was dying of a serious heart condition that he had hidden from his doctors and his superiors. By all accounts, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. should have been at home sitting on a porch, safe in the shadow of his famous father. But on the morning of June 6, 1944, while thousands of men were paralyzed by the chaos of a botched landing, this old man did not freeze. He didn't wait for orders. He looked at the German bunkers, adjusted his cane, and made a decision that saved thousands of American lives. This is the story of the man who refused to be left behind. To understand why 56-year-old general begged to die on a French beach, you have to understand the ghost that haunted him his entire, as his name was his blessing and his curse. He was the eldest son of President Theodore Roosevelt, the lion, the Rough Rider, a man who believed that life was nothing without struggle. It is hard for us today to imagine the pressure of growing up in the Roosevelt household at Sagamore Hill. It wasn't just a home. It was a boot camp for character. The president didn't just want his sons to be good citizens. He wanted them to be Spartans. He wanted them to be harder than iron. There is a story from Ted's childhood that defines this. When he was just a small boy, suffering from terrible headaches and vision problems, his father gave him a rifle and told him to go hunting. Ted couldn't even see the target. He failed. Instead of comforting him, his father was disappointed. It was only later they realized the boy needed glasses, but the lesson remained. Excuses are for weaklings. There is a famous letter from the president to his son, written when Ted was just a boy. It didn't speak of love or comfort. It spoke of cold, hard duty.
I would rather have you die than see you grow up a weakling.
Ted took those words to heart. Even when he went to Harvard, he wasn't allowed to just study. He had to play football, he had to box, he had to row until his hands bled. He was breaking his body to earn a nod of approval from the White House. He learned early on that pain was just a state of mind. When the First World War broke out, Ted Jr. saw his chance to finally prove himself. He wasn't just a privileged son in a safe office. He demanded to go to the front. He commanded the 26th Infantry, and he didn't lead from the rear. In 1918, at the Battle of Soissons, he was shot in the leg. The bullet shattered bone. The pain was blinding. The field surgeons told him he would be evacuated immediately, but Ted pulled his pistol and told the surgeon that if he dared to put him on a stretcher, there would be trouble. He wrapped the leg, used a stick to walk, and limped back to his men. He finished the war as one of the most decorated soldiers in the American Expeditionary Force. He had been gassed at Cantigny. He had been shot. He had seen his brother Quentin shot down and killed in the skies over France. He had paid the price in blood. But when he came home, the headlines didn't say hero returns. They said, Teddy's son comes home. He could never escape the shadow. No matter how much he bled, he was always just the son. He tried to follow his father into politics in the he ran for governor of New York. He wanted to continue the legacy, but he failed. He lost the election. The public saw him only as a shadow of the great Teddy. A pale imitation. By the late 1930s, Ted Jr. was seen as a man whose time had passed, a relic of a bygone era, a failed politician with a bad leg. He felt like a disappointment to his father's memory. He was aging, his body was stiffening up from the old war wounds. He thought his life was over. But then the world caught fire again, and the old warhorse heard the trumpet one last time. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, 1941, the failed politician vanished. The soldier returned. Ted didn't hesitate. Despite his age, despite the arthritis that made his joints creak like rusty hinges, he returned to active duty. But the U.S. Army had changed since 19. This was a new war, a war of technology, speed, and ruthless efficiency. And the commanders of this new war, men like Omar Bradley and George S. Patton, did not look kindly upon Theodore Roosevelt Jr. To them, he was a relic, an amateur. The conflict between George Patton and Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was not just a disagreement between officers. It was a war of philosophies. General Patton was a man of spit and polish. He believed a soldier should be clean-shaven, terrified of his officers and disciplined by fear. He believed that if a soldier looked sloppy, he would fight sloppy. Roosevelt was the complete opposite. Ted loved his men. He treated them like his own sons. He would walk the front lines not in a pristine uniform, but often wearing a wool knit cap, leaning on his cane, cracking jokes with the privates. He knew their names. He asked about their families. He didn't care about shiny boots. He cared about morale. He believed that men fought harder for a leader they loved than for a leader they feared. Patton despised this. He watched Roosevelt with disgust. He wrote in his diary that Roosevelt was bad for discipline.
He is too soft. He has too much love for the soldiers. An officer cannot be their friend. He must be their commander. He goes around looking like a hobo, and his men look like bums. It is disgraceful.
In the heat of the Sicily campaign, this tension finally snapped. It was a scorching hot day. Patton was driving his Jeep near the front when he saw Roosevelt's men. They had been fighting for days. They were exhausted, covered in dust, and some had unbuttoned their collars to breathe in the suffocating Italian heat. Patton flew into a rage. He jumped out of his Jeep and screamed at Roosevelt in front of his own troops. He humiliated him.
You are a disgrace, Theodore. Your men look like bums. If you can't make them dress like soldiers, I will find someone who can.
Roosevelt stood his ground. He looked at the pristine General Patton standing there with his ivory-handled revolvers, and then he looked at his dirty, exhausted men who had just taken a hill under enemy fire. He replied quietly, but firmly,
Sir, these men are fighting. They are not on parade. They are killing Germans. That is what matters.
That was the end. Patton had had enough. He effectively fired Roosevelt from command of the 1st Division. For a career soldier, especially for Roosevelt, this was a death sentence. To be fired in the middle of a war, it was the ultimate humiliation. The gossip in Washington was brutal. They whispered that little Teddy had finally cracked, that he wasn't tough enough. He was stripped of his command and sent to England. He was given a staff job, a desk job. He was put in charge of lights and duties. Essentially, he was put out to pasture. He was a warrior without a war. During this dark winter in London, away from the fighting, Ted fell into a deep depression. He felt his life's work was over. He wrote a letter to his wife, Eleanor, that reveals a man who felt broken.
I feel like an old dog who has been kicked out of the house. They think I am finished. Perhaps I am. My leg hurts constantly. My heart feels like a fluttering bird in my chest. But I cannot go home, Eleanor. Not like this. Not in disgrace. I have to find a way back.
But while he sat behind a desk in London, listening to the rain hit the window, a plan was forming. The Allies were preparing for the greatest invasion in history, Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. Roosevelt knew this was his last chance for redemption. He didn't care about his rank anymore. He didn't care about politics. He just wanted to be with the soldiers. But there was a problem, a big problem. His health was collapsing. The stress of the firing and the physical toll of the war had wrecked him. He developed angina, he had pneumonia, walking was agony. If the army doctors examined him properly, they would discharge him immediately. So he did the only thing that Roosevelt could do. He lied. He memorized the eye chart so he could pass the vision test. He hid his chest pains. He avoided the medical staff. He was a dying man trying to talk his way onto a boat headed for hell. Spring 1944. England is one giant army camp. Operation Overlord is a go. The air is thick with anticipation and fear. Roosevelt is desperate. He knows the invasion is coming, and he knows he cannot sit it out in an office. He petitions General Eisenhower again and again. He asks for combat command. Eisenhower liked Ted. He respected him, but he was worried. Ted was old. He was visibly frail. Eisenhower saw a man who should be retiring, not storming a fortress. He denied the requests, once, twice. But Ted had secret motivation. There was another reason he had to be there. He had learned that his son, Captain Quincy Roosevelt II, was landing at Omaha Beach. His boy was going into the grinder. Ted could not bear the thought of sitting safe in England while his son faced German machine guns. He would not let his son fight alone. In February 1944, he wrote a final letter to Eisenhower. It is one of the most persuasive military letters ever written. He didn't ask for a promotion. He made a practical argument about the psychology of fear.
The force is filled with young men who have never seen combat. They will be scared. They will be seasick. They need a general who will walk with them, not sit on a boat miles away. The men will be steady if I am with them.
Eisenhower read the letter. He knew it was a suicide mission for a man in Roosevelt's condition, but he also knew Roosevelt was right. The Green troops needed a father figure. Reluctantly, Eisenhower agreed. Ted was assigned to the 4th Infantry Division bound for Utah Beach. He would be the only general in the first wave of the invasion. The night of June 5th, on the transport ship USS Barnett, the weather was terrible. The ship was pitching in the heavy waves, and the smell of seasickness and diesel fuel was everywhere. Roosevelt moved among the men of the 4th Infantry. He knew that, for many of these boys, this was their last night on Earth. He didn't give a grand shouting speech. He sat with them. He recited poetry. He helped a terrified private clean his rifle. He was calm like a grandfather in the eye of a hurricane. Late that night, he had a private conversation with his aide, Marcus. He handed him a letter to be mailed to his wife only if he didn't return. He knew the statistics. The first wave had a casualty rate projection of 50%, and he was a slow-moving target with a cane. At 03:00 hours, the call came. They boarded the smaller Higgins boats. The spray was freezing. The Atlantic Ocean was angry. Roosevelt stood at the front of the lead craft, the salt water soaking his uniform. He looked at his watch. He looked at the coastline appearing in the gray dawn mist. He wasn't thinking about strategy anymore. He whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for his boy Quentin miles away at Omaha. The morning of June 6th, the English Channel is a washing machine of steel and vomit. Roosevelt is in the lead craft. Around him are boys, 18, 19, 20 years old. They are soaking wet, freezing and terrified, and standing among them is a 56-year-old man with a cane. Survivors later recalled that just seeing him standing there calm and smiling stopped them from panicking. But as the boats approached the French coast, disaster struck. The currents were stronger than intelligence predicted. Smoke from the naval bombardment obscured the landmarks. The landing craft were drifting. The helmsman couldn't see the church steeples they were supposed to use as guides. The wind pushed them south, further and further south. By the time the ramps dropped and the men waded into the freezing water, they weren't where they were supposed to be. They were a mile off course. The maps were useless. The seawalls were different. The bunkers were different. For a military operation that relied on precise timing, this was a catastrophe. The commanders on the radio were screaming for coordinates. The young officers on the beach were frozen. They looked at their maps, then at the terrain, and panic began to set in.
Where are we? This isn't the exit. Where do we go? Do we retreat?
Chaos began to spread. The men were huddled behind the steel obstacles in the surf, waiting to die. The invasion of Utah Beach was about to stall before it even began. They needed a leader, and there he was. Chaos began to spread. But then the men saw him. Brigadier General Roosevelt didn't run for cover. He limped slowly across the sand. He wore a wool knit cap instead of a heavy helmet. He carried a pistol he never used, and that famous cane. Mortar shells were exploding around him. Machine gun fire kicked up sand at his feet. He seemed oblivious to it. He walked from regiment to regiment, tapping soldiers on the shoulder, cracking jokes.
Get moving, boys. They can't hit you if you're moving. Up you go.
He reached the dunes and pulled out his map. He realized the mistake instantly. They were 2,000 yards south of their target. They were in the wrong place. But he also saw something else, something only an experienced old soldier would notice. By drifting south, they had accidentally landed in a lightly defended sector. The heavy German guns were a mile north, waiting for a force that wasn't coming. The mistake was actually a miracle, but they had to act fast before the Germans realized what had happened. A young colonel ran up to him, panicked. He was shouting that they were lost, that they should stop and wait for orders from the Navy. Roosevelt looked at the confused boys dying in the surf. He looked at the German guns in the distance. If they waited, the Germans would reposition. If they retreated, the invasion would stall. He turned to the colonel, His face was set in stone. He planted his cane in the sand and delivered the most legendary line of D-Day.
We'll start the war from right here.
And he meant it. He waved his cane like a conductor's baton. He personally directed the tanks off the beach. He reorganized the units on the fly, sending them inland to secure the causeways. He stood in the open, a perfect target, directing traffic under fire because of his decision to attack immediately. The 4th Infantry Division broke through the Atlantic Wall within an hour. Casualties on Utah Beach were less than 200. On Omaha Beach, thousands died. Military historians agreed. The difference at Utah was Theodore Roosevelt Jr. He didn't stop at the beach. For the next month, the old man with the cane led his men through the hedgerows of France. This was the bocage country, a nightmare of thick bushes and hidden snipers. There is a story often left out of the history books, but it is one of the most touching moments of the war. On D-Day +1, Roosevelt was limping down a road near Sainte-Mère-Église. Suddenly, a Jeep pulled up. Out of the Jeep stepped a young captain. Just Quentin Roosevelt. He had survived the slaughter at Omaha Beach and fought his way inland to find his father. The old general dropped his cane. The young captain ran to him. They embraced in the middle of the war zone, tears streaming down their dust-covered faces.
I heard you were leading the first wave, Dad. I thought you were gone.
Ted smiled, picked up his cane, and looked at his son.
The Roosevelts are hard to kill, son.
They spent only a few minutes together before duty called them back to their units. It was the last time Quentin would see his father alive. The stress of the campaign was finally catching up to him. He refused to set up a headquarters in the rear. He lived in a trailer truck called the Buster. He spent his days driving to the most dangerous parts of the line. When artillery started falling, young soldiers would dive into foxholes. Roosevelt would remain standing, lighting a cigarette, showing them that fear was a choice. But his body was giving up. His face turned gray. His breathing became shallow. His aides begged him to see a doctor. He refused. He knew that if he saw a doctor, they would send him home. And he had made a promise to Eisenhower, "The men will be steady if I am with them." He kept that promise until his heart literally could not beat another time. On July 12, 1944, just 5 weeks after D-Day, General Omar Bradley selected Roosevelt for a promotion. He was to become a major general, but the order came too late. That same night, in his converted truck, sleeping alongside his men, Theodore Roosevelt's heart finally stopped. The toughest soldiers in the U.S. Army wept openly. Even General Patton, his old rival, the man who had fired him and called him weak, finally showed respect. Upon hearing the news, Patton said,
He was one of the bravest men I ever knew.
He was awarded the Medal of Honor, but perhaps his greatest honor lies in a cemetery in Colleville-sur-Mer. If you visit Normandy today, you will find his grave. He is not buried in a special VIP section. He is buried among the men he led, and next to him lies his brother Quentin, who died in the First World War. The only father and son to storm the beaches of Normandy, and the brothers reunited in French soil. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. spent his life trying to live up to his father's name, but on the sands of Utah Beach, he didn't need to be a president's son. He was simply the soldier who walked into hell with a cane so that his boys could walk home.